Have you ever crossed paths with psychopaths in your workplace? They might be your colleagues, blending in seamlessly, or they could be in position of authority, wielding power as your superiors, or sitting at the top of the organizational hierarchy. Why do they lack empathy, operating on a different wavelength from the rest of us? What drives their insatiable appetite for risk, even when faced with the possibility of death or a lifetime behind bars? How come so many CEOs and executives exhibit psychopathic traits? Get ready, because by the end of this video, all will be reviewed. Before we start, it's important to note that psychopaths and sociopaths are not official diagnoses. They are common terms used by the public and professionals to describe certain behavioral patterns. In reality, both psychopathy and sociopathy fall under the category of antisocial personality disorder. This disorder is characterized by a disregard for the rights of others, impulsive behavior, and a lack of empathy or remorse. People with antisocial personality disorder often engage in manipulative and deceitful behaviors without feeling remorse. It's one of the 4 personality disorders that belong to cluster B, which also includes borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by unstable emotions, impulsive behavior, intense fear of abandonment, struggle with self-image, exhibiting patterns of self-destructive behaviors, and difficulties in maintaining stable relationships. Narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by an excessive sense of self-importance, a need for admiration, grandiose fantasies, arrogant or entitled behavior, and a lack of empathy for others. Histrionic personality disorder is characterized by attention-seeking behavior, excessive emotions, a desire to be the center of attention, and dramatic and theatrical behaviors in order to gain validation and recognition. The common thread among those 4 disorders is a tendency towards emotional instability, impulsive behavior, and difficulties in maintaining stable relationships. While none of these disorders are desirable, antisocial personality disorder is often considered the most severe. This is because it can exhibit traits seen in other disorders while still falling under the category of a personality disorder. For example, a sociopath may display impulsivity, which is also a characteristic of individuals with borderline personality disorder. However, it will be incorrect to say that a sociopath has a borderline personality disorder. Instead, they may exhibit some borderline traits while still struggling with antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder can manifest differently across individuals. This is where the concepts of psychopathy and sociopathy come into play. As our understanding evolves, definitions evolve over time. In simple terms, psychopathy can be seen as a combination of physical factors and environmental influences, whereas sociopathy primarily stems from environmental conditions. In other words, a psychopath may have inherent neurological issues combined with adverse childhood experiences, while a sociopath may have a neurologically normal system that has been altered by childhood trauma or mistreatment. However, it's important to remember that this explanation is an oversimplification, and it's best to consider both psychopathy and sociopathy as falling under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. To understand the inner workings of a psychopath's brain, let's explore the role of neurotransmitter called serotonin. Serotonin is a powerful neuromodulator, meaning it can initiate or inhibit signals and change their impact. Serotonin is distributed widely throughout your body, but it's particularly abundant in your digestive tract. However, its production takes place in the brainstem, specifically in groups of nuclei known as the Raphe nuclei. This nuclei generates serotonin, which then travels through neuronal pathways across the entire brain. When serotonin is released at the synapse, which is a location where neurons communicate, it first leaves the presynaptic neuron, the sender of the signal. It then enters the synaptic cleft, the space between neurons where chemical interactions occur, and attaches to receptors to the postsynaptic neuron, the receiver of the signal. Depending on factors like the location and the type of neuron, serotonin can initiate, suppress, or modulate activity within the synapse. After communication between synapses, most of the serotonin is reabsorbed back into the presynaptic neuron, a process called serotonin reuptake. However, some serotonin remains in the synaptic cleft. To break down the remaining serotonin, we need an enzyme called monoamine oxidase A, also known as MAOA. This combination of reuptake and breakdown temporarily removes the serotonin from the synapse, but it's only temporary. When the synapse needs to activate again and release serotonin, the necessary amount is readily available, ensuring the desired response. The activity of the MAOA enzyme is determined by a DNA sequence called the MAOA gene, which is located on the X chromosome. This gene can have different alleles or variants, such as MAOAH or MAOAL. These variants indicate different levels of enzyme activity when compared to a normally functioning MAOA gene. Most, if not all, psychopaths have the low-functioning variant of the MAOA gene located on the X chromosome. In rare cases, entire family lines may carry a specific mutation in the gene that renders it non-functional or inactive, resulting in no breakdown of serotonin in the synapse. You might wonder why this is concerning given serotonin's reputation as the happy neurotransmitter. It's logical to assume that having more serotonin would lead to increased happiness. For example, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which is widely used as antidepressants, limit the reabsorption of serotonin into presynaptic neurons. However, our understanding of how selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors work is not entirely definitive. We do know that they impact serotonin levels and tend to alleviate symptoms of depression. Here is where misconceptions about brain chemistry arise. Neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and others do not have sole responsibility for specific emotions or behaviors. Dopamine is not solely responsible for joy or pleasure. Serotonin is not solely responsible for happiness. Oxytocin is not solely responsible for trust or empathy. Instead, those neurotransmitters work with other hormones and neurotransmitters, forming a symphony where each component plays a vital role at the right time. Just as you would not want a single instrument dominating an entire symphony performance, neurotransmitters do not act in isolation, but rather collaborate to orchestrate the complex processes underlying emotions, behaviors, and cognitive functions. Although it may seem tempting to identify a specific gene responsible for psychopathy and eliminate it through genetic engineering, the reality is far more complex. Simply having a low activity variant of a gene does not automatically equate to psychopathy. Instead, it serves as a predictor, indicating a potential association with a psychopathic trait. Serotonin plays a significant role in the brain development of a psychopath, particularly during the embryogenesis and the fetal development. Serotonin floods the developing brain, contributing to its maturation and the formation of a fully functional brain. In people with MAOA variant, characterized by low MAOA enzyme activity, which is responsible for metabolizing serotonin, they have different serotonin levels and functioning. As mentioned earlier, the MAOA gene is located on the X chromosome. Women have 2 X chromosomes, while men have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. We inherit our chromosomes from our biological parents, with 1 coming from our mother and 1 from our father. Since women have 2 X chromosomes, they can only pass on an X chromosome to their offspring. On the other hand, men can receive either an X or Y chromosome from their father, determining their sex. This explains why the majority of psychopaths are men. If a woman has the low activity variant of gene on one of her X chromosomes, it can potentially be counteracted by the presence of a normally functioning variant on the other X chromosome. As a result, she is less likely to display psychopathic traits. While it's possible for women to exhibit psychopathic traits, it's significantly less likely because both of their X chromosomes would need to carry the low activity variant. In contrast, men only have 1 X chromosome, which they inherit from their mother. If the mother carries the low activity variant of the MAOA gene on her X chromosome and pass it on to her son, there is no second X chromosome with normally functioning variant to counterbalance it. As a result, the genetic indicator for psychopathic traits associated with the low activity MAOA gene is more likely to be expressed in men. Having the low activity variant of the MAOA gene does not automatically make someone psychopathic. It's a combination of environmental conditions and brain development that contribute to psychopathy. To become a psychopath, environmental conditions come into play. The environmental conditions include abusive parents, inconsistent or neglectful parenting, lack of emotional support, exposure to aggressive or antisocial behavior from parents or caregivers, associating with delinquent or antisocial peer groups, exposure to cultures that promote aggression, violence, or disregard for social norms, lack of positive role models or mentors, or witnessing horrifying events. Trauma at any age can be devastating, but childhood trauma holds a particularly profound impact. Even without the MAOA gene or altered brain structures, experiencing trauma during formative years can change brain function. Studying individuals with antisocial personality disorder is quite challenging. They are notoriously difficult to research because they rarely seek treatment voluntarily, unless they are court-ordered, incarcerated, or deceased, allowing for posthumous research. They are unlikely to actively pursue self-improvement because they don't see anything being wrong with them. Valuable data on psychopathy, sociopathy, and antisocial personality disorder mostly comes from PET scans, which stands for positron emission tomography. PET scans allows us to observe the metabolic activity in different areas of the brain and gain insights into the functioning of specific regions. During experiments, individuals with antisocial personality disorder undergo PET scans while contemplating moral and ethical questions, like a scenario involving a child who tragically loses both parents in a horrific car accident. In people without antisocial personality disorder, brain regions associated with morality and empathy, such as the anterior cingulate cortex and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, show increased activity. However, individuals with antisocial personality disorder exhibit significantly reduced activity in those areas, indicating a lack of empathy or a diminished level of it. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making and risk assessment, matures relatively late in human development. It doesn't reach full maturation until around the age of 25. This is why the human brain doesn't fully mature until mid or late 20s. This delay allows for learning from mistakes and experiences in the social environment, which include parents, role models, teachers, televisions, and social media. Those experiences help you develop an understanding of right and wrong and make wise decisions. The diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder is typically not made in individuals under the age of 18. Some psychologists and psychiatrists even suggest extending this age limit further. This is because children and teenagers often exhibit antisocial traits as a natural part of their development. They can be challenging, constantly testing boundaries and driving parents and caregivers to their limits. While they can be the most beautiful individuals in our lives, they can also be a handful. Think of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex as your personal risk assessment center, influencing how you perceive the world and make rational decisions. It receives feedback from other brain regions, such as the anterior cingulate, posterior cingulate, and ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which influence its functioning. However, serotonin changes during brain development in people with antisocial personality disorder can disrupt the activation of these relay pathways to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. As a result, the formation of synapses and connections within the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is affected, leading to a different sense of rationality. From the perspective of a psychopath, their behavior is not irrational, but rather formed around a different sense of rationality due to the lack of feedback from the moral and ethical processing brain regions. This explains their diminished ability to experience remorse or be moved by situations that would typically evoke empathy in others. Actions considered unacceptable by society, such as theft or harm to others, fail to elicit the same moral response in psychopaths. Their moral compass appears significantly distorted, which is alarming in social interactions. They exploit the vulnerability of others without remorse, using their charm and charisma to manipulate and deceive for personal gain with no concern for the negative impact on others. Moreover, they consistently evade responsibility, placing blame on innocent parties. Those behaviors provoke discomfort and disapproval in most of us because we recognize the moral and ethical implications. However, psychopaths have a different moral compass. Their brain processes information differently, resulting in a lack of emotional and moral qualms that trouble ordinary people. As a result, they lack the emotional connection necessary to experience empathy or guilt for their actions. As both psychopaths and sociopaths fall under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder, it's understandable that they share certain behaviors. A notable characteristic is their complete lack of empathy. Some psychopaths and sociopaths find it impossible to put themselves in someone else's shoes or truly understand others' emotions. Moreover, they experience little to no anxiety, which is different from most people's experiences, frequently feeling anxious and unease over unethical matters. Their risk assessment is influenced by this absence of anxiety, making them more inclined to take risks. Coupled with their lack of empathy, this creates a disturbing combination. They can engage in actions like theft or harm without remorse, even when there is a high risk involved. What's worse, although they lack anxiety, when they engage in risky behavior, it can still trigger physiological responses in their bodies, such as increased adrenaline and dopamine levels. Those responses can generate a sense of excitement, thrill, and the feeling of being alive. This adds fuel to their out of control behavior, exacerbating their already impulsive and reckless behavior, particularly in the case of sociopaths. Although there are similarities between psychopaths and sociopaths, there are also notable differences. Psychopaths tend to be highly calculated. They plan and execute deceitful and manipulative actions in advance. Rather than acting impulsively, they can adapt and blend in with their surroundings, observing and mimicking the behaviors of others to avoid drawing attention. They are intelligent, charming, and ruthlessly cunning, and skilled at evading detection and flying under the radar. On the other hand, sociopaths exhibit more abrasive and impulsive behaviors. They do not strive to fly under the radar like a psychopath, but rather act without regard for the consequences or the impact on others. They may engage in cruel or manipulative actions simply for the sake of curiosity or experimentation. Unlike psychopaths, sociopaths may not have a calculated approach to their actions. Currently, there is no effective treatment or cure for psychopathy or sociopathy. The primary focus of intervention is on managing their behavior and reducing the harm they may cause to others. Therapy outcomes may vary, and people with psychopathic or sociopathic traits may not always respond positively to therapy. The underlying issues are rooted in the brain, with genetic and structural changes that affect brain functioning. Environmental factors such as parenting and emotional trauma further complicate the picture because it can change the communication patterns and plasticity of the brain. While there have been advancements in understanding the genetic factors associated with psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder, it's not a simple matter of fixing a single gene. Multiple genes and their interactions need to be considered, making the process complex and challenging. Even if genetic engineering becomes a possibility in the future, it's important to acknowledge that environmental factors such as upbringing and past experiences can have long-lasting effects on the person's development and shape their behavior and emotional responses. Being better parents and role models can make a significant difference. Parenting is a challenging journey that exposes our own insecurities and issues. It requires constant self-reflection and growth. By striving to be understanding, patient, and supportive parents, we can provide a nurturing environment for our children. Of course, parenting is an imperfect process, and we all have moments of frustration or anger. But acknowledging those challenges and actively working towards better parenting can contribute to a healthier society. By fostering empathy, emotional intelligence and resilience in our children, we can create a foundation for positive development and potentially reduce the risk of psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies in our children. Psychopathy, or having psychopathic traits, is often associated with individuals involved in serious criminal activities, such as serial killers, sex offenders, and violent criminals. However, not all psychopaths engage in criminal behavior. Research conducted by an Oxford University psychologist has identified certain occupations where individuals with psychopathic traits are more prevalent. On the top of the list is a CEO or business executive. The competitive and high-pressure nature of leadership roles can attract people with psychopathic tendencies because their lack of empathy and willingness to take risk can be advantageous in certain business environments. Lawyers, known for their persuasive skills and ability to manipulate information, also appear on the top of the list. Psychopathic traits such as charm, deceitfulness, and an inclination to win at any cost may contribute to their success in the legal field. Media personalities, including journalists and news anchors, have also been associated with psychopathic traits. The demands of the media industry, including their ability to remain composed in high-pressure situations, the need to present captivating stories, their skill in influencing public opinion, and maintain a public image can appeal to individuals who have charisma, confidence, and a lack of remorse. Salespeople, known for their persuasive abilities and negotiation skills, may also exhibit psychopathic traits. Their drive for success, coupled with the ability to manipulate others, can make them effective in their roles. Surgeons, despite their life-saving work, have been found to have a high prevalence of psychopathic traits. The demanding and high-stakes nature of their profession, requiring precise decision-making and detachment, may attract individuals with psychopathic traits. Police officers, although dedicated to upholding the law, can also exhibit psychopathic traits. Those traits may be useful in managing high-stress situations and make tough decisions, but they can also pose challenges when it comes to empathy and ethical decision-making. Religious officials, such as priests or clergy members, may surprise to some, but their positions of authority and influence can be attractive to people with psychopathic traits. The ability to manipulate and control others, combined with the potential for financial gain or power, may attract some individuals to religious roles. Chefs, while seemingly unrelated, can display psychopathic traits due to their high-pressure work environment where intense focus and attention to details are essential. The drive for perfection and the pursuit for culinary excellence can align with psychopathic traits. Finally, civil servants, including those in the military, city council, or corrections, may also show a high prevalence of psychopathic traits. The need for assertiveness, leadership, and decision-making in those roles may attract individuals with psychopathic tendencies. As you can see, psychopaths often gravitate towards positions of power and influence. They may choose careers as lawyers, doctors, military members, police officers, or CEOs and executives. Psychopaths enjoy exerting power and control over others. They are good at navigating organizational environments and thrive in organizational settings. Psychopaths' diminished capacity for empathy and remorse enables them to make tough decisions without being hindered by emotional considerations. They can be more objective and focused on achieving their goals, even if it means disregarding the well-being of others. This lack of emotional attachment can give them an advantage in competitive and cutthroat corporate environments. Psychopaths can charm and deceive others to advance their own interests and manipulate situations to their advantage. This ability to influence and control others can help them rise through ranks and achieve positions of power within our organization. Psychopaths tend to exhibit a high tolerance for risk. They are more willing to take bold and potentially advantageous risk, which can lead to breakthroughs, innovations, and success in certain organizational contexts. This willingness to take risk can make them stand out and be perceived as confident and ambitious. Psychopaths typically experience less anxiety compared to others. This allows them to remain calm under pressure, making them well suited for high stress environments commonly found in organizations. In general population, about 1% of people have psychopathic traits. However, this percentage dramatically increases among individuals in prison, with about 25% exhibiting psychopathic traits. In the upper ranks of corporations, up to 3.5% of employees at those levels are estimated to have psychopathic tendencies. And when it comes to company chief executives, the numbers can be even higher, reaching around 21%. In his 2017 book, A Climate of Fear, Stone Cold Psychopath at Work, Clive Body describes how psychopaths infiltrate into the upper echelons of organizations. Here are some tactics used by corporate psychopaths to maintain and consolidate their power. First, organizational restructuring. Psychopathic leaders use organizational restructuring as a means to weaken potential threats. By reshuffling teams, departments, and reporting structures, they strategically position themselves to maintain control and diminish the influence of those who may challenge their authority. Second, bullying and coercion. Psychopaths in leadership positions often resort to bullying tactics to enforce obedience and conformity among their colleagues. Intimidation, manipulation, and coercion become tools they use to maintain dominance and suppress dissent. Third, spreading rumors. Corporate psychopaths spread rumors to undermine their competitors or colleagues who pose a threat. By sowing seeds of doubt and distrust, they aim to tarnish the reputation and credibility of those who could challenge their position or expose their manipulative tactics. Fourth, upward impression management. Psychopaths skillfully employ upward impression management techniques to project an image of competence and capability to higher-level executives and stakeholders. They carefully craft their public image, presenting themselves as valuable assets to the organization while concealing their harmful behaviors and true motives. Fifth, justification of poor behavior. When confronted with their unethical or damaging actions, psychopathic leaders often rationalize their behavior as necessary hard decisions that had to be made. They deflect responsibility and use persuasive tactics to convince others that their actions were justified in the pursuit of organizational success. Those tactics highlight the insidious nature of psychopathic people in position of power within corporations. Their ability to manipulate, intimidate, and justify their harmful behaviors allow them to navigate the corporate power hierarchy, leaving a trail of damage and instilling a climate of fear within the organization they lead. The corporate psychopath is a charming but dangerous character. As we come to understand how much damage they can do, it's a character you should stay away from. 2 recommendations have been proposed to mitigate the impact of corporate psychopath. First, don't hire psychopaths. Second, if they are already in your organization, do not promote them. Therefore, it's crucial to conduct thorough evaluations prior to hiring, especially for senior positions. Verify a candidate's stated qualifications, scrutinize their verbal and written claims, and evaluate their honesty, truthfulness, and willingness to acknowledge the contributions of others. While they might have glowing references from past supervisors, it's equally important to seek feedback from colleagues, particularly those who have worked closely with the job candidates in junior roles. This is because psychopaths are likely to have two faces. They present a charming demeanor to their superiors or bosses, creating a favorable impression on those in positions of power, but they mistreat and bully those who are in subordinate roles. You can easily judge the character of a person by how they treat people who can do nothing for them. A person's true character is reviewed by how they treat individuals who have less power or influence than them, rather than how they treat those in positions of authority or higher status. To treat low-power people well requires empathy, which psychopaths struggle to have. As a result, corporate psychopaths' subordinates are more likely to have observed the psychopath's true character beyond the reference providing supervisor's perspective. Pay attention to concerns or complaints raised by individuals who closely interact with charismatic job candidates. Although smoke does not always indicate fire, when an individual is found responsible for one fire, it's highly likely that they have ignited other fires. There is typically a pattern of troubling behaviors that becomes evident over time. When reaching out for references, it's important to consider that if the references hesitate to express unreserved praise, it does not necessarily mean the absence of troubling behavior. It may indicate the references are mindful of professional decorum and may be cautious about making disparaging remarks about past colleagues or bosses. Once in a position of power, psychopath combination of traits often leads them to engage in unethical and exploitative behaviors, disregarding the norms and creating a toxic work environment. Unfortunately, in many cases, there is no legal remedy available within organizations for psychopathic behaviors that do not meet the threshold of firing offenses, such as fraud, theft, or sexual harassment. However, it may be possible to mitigate the damage caused by a psychopath by adopting strict behavioral standards. A consistent pattern of bullying and harassment should be viewed as a red flag when considering whether an individual should hold power over other employees. Do not promote psychopath. Thank you for watching this video on psychopathic brains and how to deal with corporate psychopaths. If you want to learn more about neuroscience and leadership, tune in into my future videos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.